Hello, it's so good to see you.
Thank you. It's so nice to be talking to you.
Oh, I can see myself. I'm here. Hey. So, Brishkay, we watched the film, and I think it was my third time watching it, and it's really heartbreaking to watch it at this point of history. And I really am congratulating you for doing this because whatever happens, that piece of what used to be is with us, and it gives us something to aspire to. So I think it is really, really, really powerful and important. Yeah, I want to open the stage for the students here with us to ask questions.
Okay. I just want to say thank you to all of the students there. We're grateful that they've taken this time to get to know the story of a few Afghan women who once had opportunities and a lot of hopes and dreams. So thank you for giving your attention to their story.
Hello.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much. And the movie taught me a lot about the life of women in Afghanistan. I had no idea before what it is. And now I hope that in the future it's going to be easier for women to do whatever they want to do in Afghanistan and anywhere else. I actually have two questions. So the first one is, why do you think that it's happening? Why do women, is it like because of Islam, or is it because people are not, like the Afghanian people can't accept women doing whatever they want? Like, what is the reason that now in Canada you're free to do anything you want, but in Afghanistan or many other Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Pakistan, and women are not free to, are not fully equal? This is the first question. And the second one, as a matter of fact, now that Taliban is back to Afghanistan, so do you think that it's gonna be even worse than it was before? And is there any hope for a better future, or it's just, as you see it now, it's only gonna get worse?
Okay. Can you hear me well?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. So thank you for your thoughtful questions. I'll attempt to answer the first one. So if we are looking at, for instance, the idea of why in general in most Muslim countries, women don't have as many rights as the men, and the amount of rights they have in Islamic countries differs. Certainly Afghanistan in 2020 and between 2012 and 2020 was not like Saudi Arabia or Iran. As you saw in the film, they had more freedoms. For instance, in Afghanistan, women could appear on TV without a headscarf until very recently, until the Taliban's arrival. So there are variations in what kind of freedoms women have in Islamic countries. They vary and they differ. But generally speaking, the idea is rooted in the fact that women are seen as they are not equal to men in terms of what rights they have. It's been said that that's what it says in the Holy Quran, but that's not true. So men in power use that as a means to control society, I think, and as a means to control their households by putting limitations on women. Different Muslim people will tell you different things. Some will say that Islam never differentiates between men and women and that women are equal. And some will say that's not true, women are not equal. So there's a variety on that. And to your second question about the Taliban and whether or not it will get worse, yes. Because the Taliban are the same Taliban as they were in the 90s. And since August and end of August, since their arrival, we have seen the diminishing of women's rights to a level that does not exist under any Islamic pretense in any Islamic country. Right now, girls in high school are not allowed to attend and get an education. This is unheard of across the globe. Women have recently been told they cannot be visible on television, on dramas. This is not at all something that's practiced in any other country. So the Taliban have an agenda and an idea of how a society should be, and it's very archaic and dated and violent and brutal. So life for all Afghans will get worse, and for women it will go back to 1,000 years ago, and it's started already. Right now, women in Afghanistan are almost near to what life was like in the 90s, except the only difference right now is the rule to wear the burqa is not enforced as it was back then. That's the slight difference.
Thank you. Go ahead. Hi, so it's incredibly inspiring to see your documentary. And I also have two questions. So first of all, like such powerful and committed women, how was it for them to leave Afghanistan? Like, did they have to be convinced? And then second of all, what are these women up to now? I heard that most of them are in Canada. Like, are they involved with what is going on in Afghanistan?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, first the women, in all honesty, the women in the television news network did not expect August 24th or the last week of August to occur. At the worst, they thought that maybe the Taliban would return and maybe the Taliban would have some kind of a negotiation with the Afghan government, and that there would be some processing of negotiations, but that they would still be retained possibly some of their rights. They never expected this. August happened really quick, and it also happened in the midst of the pandemic. So the women were at home. They were not reporting from the station. They were working from their homes when the news came that the Taliban were arriving. I think Tal knows because we've had Nazanin, the journalist, talk with us. They immediately went into hiding. And you know, the network that they worked for is called Women's Network. So it's obvious that there would be retaliation against them. So interestingly enough, the support to get them out was pretty easy for most of them, not for Nazanin because she's still stuck, and they all arrived to Canada. And right now, they are settling into Canada and getting ready to continue their work as journalists. Maybe not journalists in Canada because of the language barrier, but they have all started via social media, like via Twitter and Facebook, writing, commenting, and participating in Afghan Journalist Association organization meetings and things. Yeah, they're doing well, but they're not happy about their circumstance, obviously. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
No problem.
I'm carrying the torch upstairs, just a second.
What do you think it would take for things to get better in Afghanistan?
Well, at this moment, it seems that since we have no government in Afghanistan because our former president left, our military has left or surrendered to the Taliban. What would it take? It would take the Taliban to be removed from the power that they hold. That's what it would take. How that would happen would be in participation with the international community, because partly the reason why this has occurred is because of the Taliban's relation to the international community and a deal that was made without Afghan women's involvement with certainty and without, you know, Afghanistan's government's involvement even. So the international community has to somehow get involved and put the pressure on and remove these terrorists that are sitting and trying to rule a nation as if they are legitimately elected officials. You know, the most important thing is, and it's funny, is that the Taliban treat Afghanistan like it's their country. They're all outsiders who've entered the country, yet they call it their country when people inside the country, Afghans, and are sort of taken over and they have lost their nation. So it's very strange to be a country that's left in the hands of terrorists. So I hope the international community in some clever way manages to get us out of the trouble that they've put us into.
Hi, so first of all, thank you for making this film and coming to speak to us. So I also have two questions. My first one is, so following these four women in the film, it felt like it was showing a pretty positive trajectory for women in Afghanistan, but given the recent takeover of Taliban, do you feel that it almost gives a false hope or tells like a false narrative given the recent developments?
No, I definitely don't think it gives a false narrative. I think it reaffirms who Afghan women are and what they were expecting and what they were aspiring to based on the promises that were made to them. You know, in 2001, liberating Afghan women was a slogan that was sold all over the world. You know, NATO with its, 30-something countries, the United States in particularly, kept on saying, we have to save Afghan women, we must liberate Afghan women, we must protect Afghan women, these activities for Afghan women, this is for Afghan women. So, it's not a false narrative because a lot of that happened. They gained back a lot of the freedoms, and there's a generation that grew up in the digital age, and these are Afghan women. So what happens is with Afghanistan, Afghan women get framed and confined to a certain memory of a time frame. So most often people think of Afghan women as the women in the blue burqas getting whipped by the Taliban because of the 6 or 7 years sort of rule of the Taliban in the 90s. And now again, they're getting framed that that's who they are. But in reality, that's not at all who Afghan women are. So I think it's a more accurate representation because it tells the world this is who the women are. And in brief periods of our history, whether it's in the 90s and again now, and even in the late 1930s, for brief periods, Afghan women always have to suffer like this for a certain amount of years. We don't really know the answer, but it happens repeatedly. And at some point, this vicious cycle has to end. So I hope that people see Afghan women in the way that I've shown them, which is who they are, and not who they are forced to be by the Taliban.
And my second question is, if you could just tell a little bit more, like your personal experience directing it, like what it made you feel scared or inspired or motivated, and just a little bit more about your experience directing.
Sure. I've worked in Afghanistan a lot in the past decade, so I'm very comfortable in my country when I go back. But these women really did inspire me. Just because they were so young and like they had such a, they're in their early 20s. Shakupa, the news director, in the film was 25 in 2020. So the rest are all between 20 and 25. So this is, they're young, they're they're connected to the globe from the digital technology. They're a very new generation. So I really enjoyed filming them because they had guts and, they never wanted to become their mothers. They really believed with all of their heart until the end of the film, when you notice it, that things would somehow be okay. And it's very dangerous work for them. Because it's not just the suicide bomb attacks, the terrorist events that happen in Afghanistan daily. They are still young Afghan women, so they're also policed by society. in many ways that sort of interfere in their work and judge them and name call them. And they put up with all of that because they really believe in being journalists and being good journalists. And they're no different from any good journalist that you have in Israel or anywhere in the world, you know? So, yeah, so I really enjoyed being in their company, but because I'm older and also I'm coming in from the West, I was very concerned for the outcome because I knew that 50% what happened in August is very possible. I had a sense of that. But I didn't want to continuously tell them that because that would interfere in their daily life. So I just, you know, kept my input out and just observed what they shared with me and just kept it authentic that way. Does that help answer your question?
She no longer has the microphone, so she can't tell you.
Oh,
I'll tell you. Yes, definitely. I just want to say that in parts of the film, we can actually hear you respond to the bombing and stuff, and I think it really adds something unique to our experience because we're there with you as well as outsiders.
well, if you notice in the bombing incident, I was more scared than they were. Like I was like going, oh my God, you know, like it was bizarre for me. But interestingly, if you saw in the film, like Firishta knew that the attack was going to happen just based on her mobile signal being on and off, which was so fascinating that they live in that type of a world. You know what I mean? And I know in Israel, there's also dangers that occur. But do you know what I mean? They've just grown up in this world where they can read things that I couldn't, you know?
Yeah.
Hi. So a little bit of personal experience. I was in Kabul in 2007. I taught at the American University of Afghanistan. And I just say that alumnus and staff are still totally stranded there. They've just been left there with little to no help. Some of the students were sent to different schools. They managed to do something for them, but the alumni and the staff, you know, anyone with a position to raise their voice for them, I would ask you to. So that's just one side, but I'd actually be really interested to know what you think of, you know, groups like Hamas or others who have congratulated the Taliban. And I'm just wondering what you think the messaging around that is. Like, what is the message there exactly in your viewpoint? I suppose that would be like one of the questions I would ask. And also I'd be really interested what you think of Panjshir, the Panjshir resistance and what that messaging around that is as well.
Yeah. Okay. I definitely will try to answer those. So firstly, 2007 was sort of the prime good times in Afghanistan, in Kabul. So, right. It was much safer in that time span because I think ISAF was there at that point. So I'm glad you saw it when it was, in its better sort of days. And I'm really sorry to hear that your friends have been abandoned, faculty of the American University, because I'm certain that the name American University would be very problematic for them, with ISIS and maybe some Taliban fractions and stuff. So I do hope that they somehow are helped. And I will definitely, if you share something with me, with Tal on Facebook, I will share it. First to that. And second, I think you asked about the terrorist groups like Hamas and all of them. And I do call them the terrorist groups. I mean, yeah, it's not shocking. All those, whether the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, all of them, when it comes to women and girls' rights, they have a certain philosophy which I completely disagree with. And I think that their ideas are about controlling society. And so it comes with this point of view of, firstly, eliminating 50% of the population, because if 50% of the population do not participate in society and are not allowed to be free citizens and are mostly indoors, then it's much easier to control society. You need less weapons and you need less soldiers, and it's just much more manageable. So I see that reasoning of hindering women's rights. I don't think it has anything to do with religion. It's just a way of how can we manage this population? Oh yeah, let's just say that women and girls should not go out, should not do this, should do this. Let's just keep them inside. That's first. Second, it's just one terrorist organization telling another terrorist organizations, congratulations. It means nothing. It should, if anything, the international community should pay attention to things like that. Who is congratulating the Taliban? Let's ask those questions. Okay, it's Hamas. Well, Hamas sends suicide bombers in the Middle East all the time. They do terrible things. So, okay, so it's a thug and a thug. Oh, that makes sense. Right, okay. More reason not to accept the Taliban in any sense and not to give them any legitimacy at all. That's how I see it. Obviously, they're in company that is that lives off terror and horror and eliminating women's rights. In your question about Panjshir, I have a different memory of the Mujahideen freedom fighters and the Taliban because in the late 80s and early 90s, and I think at the start of the film use, I mentioned it, America funded the Mujahideen with a lot of weapons. And they with the Taliban had a civil war for many years. And the Mujahideen were not that kind and wonderful to women and girls. And they were also not kind and wonderful to the Hazara people. There was a lot of atrocities that had happened to women and girls by the so-called freedom fighters, the Ahmed Shah Massoud's people and all of that. Now, for instance, in Panjshir, you have the Mujahideen mainly rallied behind by Ahmed Shah Massoud's son. What does that mean? A lot of Afghans support that, and they believe that that's going to possibly help them. From my past history and experience, my generation didn't see good in that. My mother didn't see good in that. So I'm not that hopeful. Yeah, I can't count on them. It's the best way I can say.
Thank you. And Galia will ask the last question.
Hi, thank you again. This was fascinating. I have two quick questions. One, there were 20 years of, education for not just for women, but also for, young boys and girls under American occupation. And as you said, there's a new generation, this new generation, the digital generation, they're all on social media. And I'm wondering, and maybe it's wishful thinking, whether the Taliban can really bring Afghanistan back to where it was, whether there's any, it's a huge group of young people who've been trained differently and who have different skills and use social media. And maybe there's a possibility of some internal pushback or change coming from within, because it seems pretty, the grim reality is that probably change will not come from outside. So whether the fact that there is, we did have 20 years of education that shaped the minds of young people who are like teenagers or young in their 20s now, might make a difference or make it harder for the Taliban. And the second question is the flip side of this, the US. I'm wondering how much of this is, is seen as like America's fault, or how much of this is seen as like an internal problem in, of the Afghan society. I know there's a lot of disappointment from the US, but is this really, all on the US?
Right. Yeah. Well, great question. Yeah, great questions. So yes, this generation, you're right, absolutely. They are, much more connected to the global world. And even now, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and things, young people are sharing stories and videos and all those things that about what's happening in Afghanistan. So people are like what the Taliban is doing, what's happening in daily life is being shared with people outside. So that they are able to do that. For your question of whether or not Afghans inside Afghanistan can unite and somehow take over, get back their country without international help, at the moment, I don't see it. Because at the moment, what the Taliban are doing is going to like various places and displaying acts of horror. Like, for instance, in Helmand, they hanged people and drove them across trucks. some with heads and some without heads on the middle of the road. And so they're doing these kinds of things which put immense fear in people. So they're not doing it to everybody, and they're not doing it every day, but these kinds of gruesome actions can put so much fear in people that it makes people scared to unite. That's the first. Their brutality is of a different level. Secondly, unfortunately, there was a lot of weapons that were left behind when the US withdrew, when the Afghan military surrendered. So the Taliban have a lot of weapons, a tremendous amount, that they may not have the capabilities right now, for instance, on how to use some of those machines because they are usually computer technology, but they certainly know how to use the guns and all of that, and they might even find ways to use the other machinery. So that's the other thing that's against the Afghan people. Thirdly, unfortunately, they arrived at the end of August, and now we're looking for the next 6 months of cold, brutal winter. And when people are starving and they are cold and they have no money, it makes the urge to get up and fight even harder. So as you know, no one is getting, barely anyone is getting a salary in Afghanistan. There's food shortage, winter, there's fear every day. So there's that, the biological need, this physical security need of shelter, of food, that's all being stripped away. And when you do that, it's hard for people to fight back. It kind of goes back to that simple Maslow's theory, the hierarchy theory. And so I think this is a strategic way of what they're doing, is to just remove the morale of people. There will always be people that will stand up and fight. There will always be women that will protest. Afghanistan has always had the Revolutionary Association of Women, the RAWA, which still exists in Pakistan. But whether or not they can manage to take their country back, it's going to be very, very difficult without the international community. And lastly, there's also the addition on top of it is the brain drain that has happened in Afghanistan. So a lot of people have left, a lot of people have been evacuated, and the people that have been evacuated, the people that have left, have been the activists. They have been the people that can read, write, be super engineers, a lot of that. So there's a big brain drain as well that's happened. And to your question about, is the United States to blame? For me, other people might have different answers. Yes, because as you saw in the film, in 2001, Laura Bush went on national radio and said words that if you take those words and compare it to what happened in the Taliban peace talks and in August, it is contrary. I'm not sure why the US negotiated this deal. I have no idea what is in those papers and the details of it, but they knew very well that these are the Taliban, most of them released from Guantanamo, arrested in 2000 because these are terrorists. They also know that these people's armies were prisoners in Afghanistan's biggest prisons that were frequently, the Afghan government was forced to release them. So you have prisoners and you have terrorists, and you are negotiating their return. You know exactly what's going to happen to women and girls. You're well aware of it. It would be a joke to say that the United States was not aware of what the Taliban would do in terms of women and girls. I think the US is shocked of what the Taliban is doing to all Afghans. I think that is what they didn't expect. This quick arrival and this immediate brutality, and the Afghan government crumbling as it did. The Afghan government themselves and the military was not sufficiently ready. They were not part of the talks, so I don't know how anybody expected them to be able to welcome the Taliban and have a discussion. That itself was a strange thing. I think the United States needs to be held accountable for handing over an entire nation, and with the knowledge that with certainty women and girls' lives would be immensely impacted and their freedoms would be taken away. Willingly they did that, and I don't know if that is a war crime or not. I'm not a lawyer, but it's close, in my opinion. Yeah. Did I answer your questions?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brishkay. Do you want to say something to conclude, or should we?
You know, I just want to like tell people, you know, particularly your audience, because you have a smart, intelligent audience that is interested in global affairs and is interested in women's rights. Don't just think that this is Afghanistan. Let me assure you, Taliban in Afghanistan is a breeding ground for terrorists. And that's their goal. The only way they can stay in power is to continue expanding their army with, and their intention. If you know Afghanistan, we have ISIS inside Afghanistan as well, and ISIS is in Syria and also in Iraq. So these type of fundamentalist terrorists who are human rights violators, there is a desire to expand in the region and around the region, and wherever they go, women and girls' rights will be taken away. Definitely children will suffer, and civilians will suffer. So don't just look at it as it's something that's just happening in Afghanistan. With caution, understand that this kind of these kinds of groups, just it is something that the world needs to unite and help prevent their expansion. Yeah, that's all I can say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tal, for organizing this. And yeah, thank you all for coming today.
Thank you. I don't know if you heard us because the microphone is here, but there's a lot of clapping. So yeah, we'll say goodnight, and we'll keep on working together on whatever we can to keep this thing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your attention and for amplifying Afghan women's voices. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe, everyone.